We are definitely excited to be able to share the stage with these beautiful women to talk about the intersection between race and mental health and how psychedelics can support what we have going on with other races and other indigenous communities. And so I have Spring Washam, Phoenix White, Sutton King, and Azusa Kabibi. Okay, and we have those. So I guess I'll start off with the very first question, and I'm going to throw this out. This isn't to anyone in particular. How do you see the current landscape of mental health awareness within the African American community, and what role do psychedelics play in this context?
I'll go. So just to slightly introduce myself, I'm Azusa Kabibi, but I'm an author and an advocate for survivors of sexual abuse. My nonprofit organization is Precious Little Ladies. Our mission is to combat childhood sexual abuse and gender-based violence by strengthening the bond between mothers and daughters and educating the community. So what we have found is that the stigma that surrounds specifically African Americans and people of color when it comes to mental health is that we're resilient. Our history in America through slavery, we have survived that, and we should be commended for that, but at the same time, it needs to be acknowledged that that experience has been passed down through the generations, and it has manifested in the communities in different ways. However, we as a people don't really look to finding mental health resources, one, because the medical community does not really acknowledge that we need them, that quality resources are difficult to find in the Black community. And also, especially Black women, we're supposed to make it through. We're supposed to carry that. We're supposed to be great in spite of. And sometimes looking for mental health can make individuals feel like they're weak.
Okay. So in what ways can the psychedelic community help address historical disparities and ensure equitable access to mental health benefits for people of color?
Okay.
Well, I would love to just, answer that first question from just more of an indigenous perspective. But first, I'll introduce myself. Poso, Sagoli, Sutton King, Naktau, Pinuki, Nukyat Sungwahawe, Ni'i, Wagneta, Nawaki Talota, Oniota Aga Ni'i. Hello, relatives. My English name is Sutton King. My Menominee name is Naktau Pinuki, which means comes first woman. I identify as Afro-Indigenous. I'm a descendant of the Menominee and Oneida Nations of Wisconsin. And I introduced myself in my language, the Oneida language, really as an act of resistance to really reclaim what settler colonization has tried to take from us. So when I think about mental health and the indigenous perspective, I think about our lens of health, right, which is very much so in opposition to the Western world's way of thinking about health, which is very individualistic and reductionist. When we think about the indigenous perspective, we really think about the medicine wheel. We think about the mental, the emotional, the physical, the spiritual. And we understand that all of those four parts of ourselves have to be in balance to really be able to heal, to be in harmony, right? To be able to come into this next level of consciousness. We understand that when we look at health, it's also a relational perspective, right? It's a relationship that we have with land. It's a relationship that we have with ourselves, with our family, and with our community. And so when you think about mental health within indigenous communities, we have some of the worst health outcomes and mental health disparities in comparison to any race or ethnicity. And that's really, look at the status of our land. Look at climate change. Look at what we have suffered with land disposition, right? Our connection to land, we really have this belief of kinship, which is the interconnectedness of all things. And so when you take our land from us, you're taking away our life source, our medicine. And so I think, you really touched on just being resilient. I think that's really important also because indigenous peoples, we are resilient. I think we academia hyper-focuses on our trauma and really doesn't talk about the resilience that it takes to still be here today, for my ancestors to have been able to fight, being both Black and Native American, the resilience that exists within my DNA. But I think, again, when we're really considering health and we're considering the psychedelic space, we really need to bring indigenous views and perspectives onto these stages, into these boardrooms, into these governance structures, so that we can create more equitable spaces and delivery systems.
Definitely. You all can take this question.
So I want to thank you so much. I think those are such key points, is that the psychedelic movement it's a contextual movement. It's a holistic model, right? You don't just do a ceremony of a community. You have land, you have a purpose, so I think that's a very important point. So my name is Spring Washam, and I want to say a bit more about the evolution of the psychedelic movement, plant medicine within BIPOC communities, Black communities, and the growing amount of interest that is there. Years ago, I started doing a meditation community. I founded a meditation center in downtown Oakland, trying to bring Buddhism, mindfulness, and compassion practices to an urban environment. And people thought, you're crazy, no one's gonna do that. It was huge. It continues years later, it's like 15 years later. The interest in mindfulness for mental health, all these beautiful seeds that we planted are there. While I was there, I started talking about the need for people to work with plant medicine. Like I was sneaking it in. I was already leading retreats in Peru and talking about trauma, because honestly, when you get a gathering of communities of color in an urban setting, we were in downtown Oakland, you're gonna be talking about trauma, vicarious trauma, police trauma, racism from intergenerational. As we know, recently we heard that there was this beautiful article written about how memories are passed down. Well, those are traumatic memories and also beautiful memories of our great-great-great-great-grandmothers. So what I noticed is that there has been a real openness to working with these medicines, and there's been a barrier, I think, in the larger community because it's defined already. Even the word psychedelic, that word has a lot of baggage on it. You think psychedelic, you think Golden Gate Park, people tripping, white guys jumping out of windows, you see, you have a lot of imaging around that. But when I say natural medicine, earth medicine, plant-based medicine, things that are gonna kill you, your mental health, your family lineage, your ancestors, your spirit, now we're having a different conversation, right? So I think a lot of this movement is about us defining what is the narrative, how we want this to be communicated to the world, what are our stories that are unique. And I think if we can do that skillfully, there are so many communities that could benefit from this. Anything from healing racialized trauma, from healing depression. We know the benefits, right? It's just getting over that hurdle, the stigma, the baggage of the language, and making this a renewed, redefined conversation for this moment in time. Because people need access to this. So I just want to say that, and I can talk more about a project that I have going on called Spirit Underground, focused on communities of color in Georgia. But I'd love to hear some other.
Hey guys, I am Phoenix White, and I am a psychedelic therapist. I specialize in ceremonial psychedelics and multi-sensory healing experiences. What I've seen in my work, which is a little bit different, is I've seen that a lot of people of color, all types of people of color, they do not trust this medicine. And I think having great representatives that don't look like we're crazy, don't look like the stereotypical narrative of what we think or what we were told in our culture, what psychedelics do to you, is really, really important. I have been seeing it move forward quite a bit more. But you have to have the right type of facilitators and people to teach us how to do it the right way, because I think what might end up happening, if done the wrong way, it gets taken away, the access gets taken away, and we already are having to fight to have more access, because in the medical industry, you know, just listening to all the panels here, and they're talking about the legalization of it, what's gonna end up happening is people who don't have medical insurance will not be able to access these medicines. So that will cut out a lot of people from being able to have access to natural plant medicines and other psychedelics that they have. And so I think it's really important to study harm reduction, like to really like have people like these ladies up here and myself who know what they're doing, and to be able to have, you know, right representatives who are teaching people how to use these things properly, because if we're not using it properly, then we already get X'd out. It's already hard enough for us to get into it anyway. If you look at this conference, there's not a lot of black people at this conference. It's like a sprinkle, you know, and it's not because we weren't invited, it's because we don't know about it. It's not like we can't be here. We're on the stage, we can be here. We don't know that it even exists, you know, and so it's not trickling down to our environment to be able to have the access to it. We don't have the information because there are not enough people who are standing in the gaps that are like us, that are standing up for it, that know what they're doing. And so I think that's where I'm at.
I would love to just also touch on a couple things you spoke to, trust and access. And I think from, you know, the indigenous perspective, I'm the co-founder of the Urban Indigenous Collective. We provide access to and advocate for culturally tailored health and wellness services for urban natives within the tri-state area. We just opened our first community center in Midtown Manhattan this summer, so we're really excited, so thank you. But one thing I always say is we move at the speed of trust. When we think about our government policies, when we think about healthcare, there is such a mistrust. We have seen assimilation policies that have put us into boarding schools. We have seen just a grossly underfunded Indian health service that has given us such a poor quality of healthcare and treatment. And so coming into our community with the center, really wanting to center trust, we have been really moving in a slow way to really center community-based participatory research so that we really can meet our community where they're at, really making sure that the services and the programming that we're creating are actually a co-creation based in community voice, so that what we're creating is sustainable for the 7 generations, right? And that has been such a beautiful way to create something that we think is going to be a legacy for our community. We know that 70% of Native Americans live in urban spaces. You touched on urban spaces and the work that you're doing. Because of these relocation policies, many of us now live in those spaces and are really feeling that disconnection to land, culture, community, and a lot of the healthcare disparities that come from that. And when we talk about access, you know, as I said, Indian Health Service, and some context that's important for folks to know is that Native Americans and Alaskan Natives within the United States are born with free healthcare through Indian Health Service. If you are enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, a state recognized tribe, or you are a first, second, or third degree descendant, your healthcare is free, right? But with an Indian Health Service, which is very similar to the VA, Indian Health Service is grossly underfunded, usually at 52% of its capacity. When you look at its budgets for urban spaces, and now I said 70% of us live in urban areas, but urban programs are funded at 1 to 2% in that line budget. So you do the math, it's not mathing to me. So there's a lot of limited care that's happening. But furthermore, in terms of access, I think in a traditional sense, access to psychedelics, which for indigenous peoples, that's really disrespectful to even call them psychedelics, right? They're our relatives, they're plant medicines. It's unequivocally bioculture conservation. It's conservation of the land, it's land back. It's supporting the land and the indigenous leaders who know how to tenure the land and steward the medicine. And I think it's a complete misstep for this psychedelic renaissance or boom to start thinking about psychedelic assisted therapy without really investing in the conservation needs that indigenous peoples need now.
I agree with you.
So you spoke to trust and distrust of these systems, and we have an historical distrust with the healthcare system in general with, I don't know, there's a book called Medical Apartheid about all the different ways that medicine has been weaponized against our communities, and in what ways can we do things to kind of minimize that in the psychedelics realm, because it seems to get legalized and go through all the things that it needs to go through. We already aren't in psychology and psychiatrist offices, so to speak. Like, are there ways that we can create other containers to have these medicines presented to our people without having the distrust of the actual medical industry?
I can answer that question because I do it. Like I said, I'm the founder of the Sacred Celestial. So what I do is I actually create healing ceremonies for people all over. It doesn't matter if you're a person of color or not for minds. But I have found that 60% of the people that come to my ceremonies are people of color. And it's because my staff is also, like a couple of them are also people of color. So what we have found is people trust us, like she was saying. They trust us, so they're coming. They're like, oh, wow, this is making them better. This is what they're doing. This is like how their life is going. Like, they're looking at our experiences. We're not having to convince people. We don't convince anybody for plant medicine. But we create these ceremonies and we draw people to us with what we're doing, with the presence, like how we are leading ourselves, you know, what people are getting from us. So in our ceremonies, we create safe spaces. We travel all over the world creating these safe spaces. We do our ceremonies with psilocybin, and we have a 2-day thing. So the reason why we're doing it in ceremonies is because it's also way cheaper than doing a one-on-one or going to an office. It's way cheaper to do it in a group, so people can come as a group for a lower amount of money and still get that individualized attention. And so that's been really, really powerful to see people, and it's bringing people together with that psychedelics, and it's bringing together community, like she was saying, at the same time. And people are getting that deeper healing work that they've been looking for. And that's why I do it. It's like, and then the second day will be integration. So people also can't leave minds. So it's like, oh, you don't just do medicine. You're not just going to do the drugs or whatever. I don't call it drugs. I call it plant medicine. But you don't just do that. You actually have to go through an integration process. You have to go through the therapeutic process. You have to do the steps, or you can't come, because you have to be willing to do that work. And it's like, if you're not ready to go deeper, you shouldn't probably be doing psychedelics, you know?
And also, to piggyback on what you were saying, another model, I'm very skeptical of this medical way for historical reasons, access reasons, and also over-regulation. People are in your business. You have to apply for things. You have to go through all of these steps, and it's just not worth it, you know, for a lot of people to do that route. So one model that I am exploring, and many other people, and you're seeing a rise in it, I'm here due to a friend of mine who is starting these churches. Now this, again, has a benefit. For the Black community, your church is where you feel at home. There's a community there. You're not in an isolated office with somebody looking at you through a glass window, or you know, you're with your people you see every week. You're with your neighbors. So this idea of a community, a church, is, I believe, the most important thing that could happen with this whole movement, is people creating churches around, you know, rather it's like Sando Daime, Christianity and plant medicine, the rise in psilocybin churches, or, you know, so this is for me an exciting moment, because I moved to Atlanta, Georgia to start a psychedelic church, basically, with Harriet Tubman and Buddhist practice and Christian mystics. And this is exciting, you know, and I'm one of many, as I learn of this growing movement, about creating community, not just a night, not just a session, but a lifestyle, and integrated lifestyle.
So I love that, and I want to talk to you about how to do it. But I think I've found that people don't want everybody to know what they're doing that come to me, necessarily. They don't want anybody to know they're doing psychedelics. So if they're at the psychedelic church, they're going to feel like, oh, you know, and it's already, you know, hard to talk about for some people just in general. So, but I've wanted to set up the church just for the benefits of that, of being able to do it. But I've found people have wanted to be a little more underground with it and a little more private as far as that goes. But I wanted to make one more point, if I can. to your point with the indigenous parts, it's very important to really understand that this medicine is sacred. It is not a magic drug. It is to be honored and is to have reverence. This is something that is really, really powerful. It has an incredible network, how it attaches and creates itself. It is not just a magic pill that you just take. It has a spirit attached to it. This is not a drug. You know, and so I think that the ceremonial practices, the indigenous practices, taking it back. I live in Mexico, so that's where I learned about it. I learned about the sacredness of it to start with. It's super important to make sure that you're honoring this medicine in this sacred way, and it's not just being taken away from the people and being turned into a pharmaceutical thing that everybody has to pay all this money for when it just grows on the land in these indigenous places and just being sucked away. Like that's also something that's not cool.
Thank you. Since we're talking about like trust and religious, freedom, I think it's also important to understand in the Native American and indigenous context, when we think about manifest destiny, when we think about the assimilation policies, we think about the boarding school era like I talked about. And what really happened there was really this disconnection from culture, our traditions, our ceremony, our plant medicines. I always tell the story. I grew up in the powwow circle. I grew up dancing jingle dress. And I'm thankful for my mother, who was born in the 70s, who really ensured that I understood my culture and felt pride, being Afro-Indigenous. But if you ask my grandmother if she'd been to a powwow, she would say no. And that's because it was illegal, right? When we think about the First Amendment and we think about religious freedom, that didn't apply to Native Americans in this country until about 45 years ago, right? And that was only through the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which is really an oxymoron, right? Because we're making a law about religious freedom. And I think it's also ironic when we think about settlers who came to the United States and Turtle Island, they were, fleeing from religious persecution, then to persecute indigenous peoples for their beliefs. And now we found ourselves in this, this psychedelic renaissance or boom, and now the world is saying, oh, it's okay, and we're going to commercialize and make money from your medicines. And I think it's, when we talk about decrim and legalization and medicalization, we really need to be sensitive, especially on this topic about churches. The Native American church, for example, right, had to come together to be able to sit with their medicines and their peyote ways. And when we think about decriminalizing peyote, the Native American church is saying, no, please don't do that. Please leave our medicine alone. And I think if we want to be really true allies in this space, what we can do is just take a pause and listen, right? And I think there are other medicines that we can use that can give us that transformational healing that we're looking for, that is not in direct opposition to the indigenous peoples of this land who are still trying to heal from the exploitation of land and labor. And I know you wanted to say something.
I think that people are afraid of what they don't know. So I think one key to building trust around psychedelics would be education, clearly. I mean, yes, we have this event, but people are coming because they know about it. And I think it's important that education in spaces where people who may not be interested in this specifically outside of the niche, then that would help to build trust. Among the many hats that I wear, I am the chair for the East Orange Cannabis Board. So in New Jersey, cannabis was just legalized. And there has been a lot of pushback with bringing cannabis to the community because a lot of people just don't know about it. They have the same stigmas and beliefs that was perpetuated throughout the history, through the war on drugs. And when we educate them, it changes their minds, and then they're more trusting of the process.
Yeah, so is my mic still on? So in addition to that, like where we talk about the legalization or the decriminalization of these drugs, we know when the war on drugs that you talk about that our community has been disproportionately prosecuted for these things. How are we able to keep a safe space while we're doing these things? Because I think about like, hey, if this Wonderland conference was an all-black conference, would it still have the level of freedom that it has while we're exploring the psychedelic space and the psychedelic boom? Like, would law enforcement be around the building if this was an all-black conference? And so my questions to you are, I mean, again, we all are doing these. You have a center that you're doing, and you do a Sacred Celestial that you're doing, but how can we protect ourselves from the legal ramifications of this while we're trying to get this into our communities?
I work a lot with legislators. And just to tell you a little bit more about myself, I was raised very isolated. I was homeschooled. I was raped and molested by my father from 8 years old. I had 4 children by him. And he taught me that the government was evil. Now, antithetically to him creating this fear in me, he also educated me on the history of Black Americans and of Africans. So once I escaped him, I had to learn to build trust with anybody, whether male, female, it didn't matter. And in the process, I did educate myself. I graduated, I went to college with 2 bachelor's degrees, and my journey has brought me into the political world. And I find that local politicians, it's important to engage them. It's important to vote. I'm not here, trying to say, oh, vote for this person, but it is important to vote for the people that you feel align with your beliefs, and psychedelics being one of them. Go into their spaces, educate them. So for me, incest is still legal in New Jersey. And I now have to work and have been working with politicians to convince them that we need to criminalize incest. We need to criminalize incestuous abuse. So I think that approach works with many other things, and psychedelics being one of them. Just not only educating the common man, but also those who are in power to make decisions. Talk to, law enforcement, local law enforcement on a very close level, and I think that then ripples out to the bigger landscape.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing just your truth. I appreciate you. I think in the indigenous perspective, it's really exercising sovereignty. And I think, you're in New Jersey doing a lot of work in cannabis. An example of that would be what we're seeing with the Shinnecock out on Long Island. A good friend of mine, Shanae Bullock, who's the CEO of Little Beach Harvest, setting to open doors on Wednesday. The way that they have been able to get their tribal council and tribe to really support the, opening of this dispensary is remarkable. And so I think if we can talk to our tribal governance and our tribal council leaders to really be able to support the use of psychedelics and cannabis. I mean, I was just at the Indigenous Cannabis Policy Summit in DC, and to learn, about all the different tribes who are starting to take on these, activations and really starting to think through how they can really support the use of cannabis to support their economy. I mean, historically, it's really been tribal gaming. So how can they diversify that? It's really interesting to really start being able to start that conversation around plant medicines. But again, there's a lot of mistrust because of what the government has done and the propaganda that has happened since boarding school era. So I think a lot of education is important, but there is so much opportunity, especially with sovereign power within the United States and tribes.
I think it's, in addition to what they're saying, is the question was, how do you navigate this, being that it's not legal, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So what I've had to do is just know where I am for right now, because there's nothing else I can do. I know where I am. I have the education of it. And then just staying on top of, MAPS is really good at staying on top of, where it's legal, where it's not, where it's decriminalized, where it's not, and sticking to the purpose of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So in Mexico, it's illegal, but it's legal if you use it for a ceremony. So it's like knowing just, but there's a twist. It's illegal, but it's legal if you use it for ceremonial purposes. So just kind of knowing where you are and how you can use it where you are, because it's different for everywhere. And that's how I navigate it.
Yeah, similar, and started in Peru where it's celebrated, and Brazil where it's honored. One quick point I want to say about, I think, this particular period of time, and I think so many beautiful points you're bringing, Sutton, about the indigenous perspectives, the historical, the trauma, is I think that the openness between these two communities, to learn. I don't think, my experience of the African American communities, they don't want to come in and replicate a system of oppression and do these things unconsciously at all. There's a high level of sensitivity. There's a lot of questions being asked all the time to me, to our groups, to how history, lineage. And so I hope that we can begin, as this conversation expands into more urban places, that the indigenous community we can partner and work more together. I think for both sides, that would be so healing, so important for transmission, because there's big pieces that is not being highlighted. And that maps, as we know, the conference that happened, the historic conference that happened in Denver, at the end, a group of indigenous people interrupted the closing. They were not heard, they had not been seen. When we don't do this work, it will come back to bite, right? And things get held up. We see this in Colorado. The indigenous group held up another bill, right? Because they said, you guys didn't include us. This does have to be a healing. It has to go back to the founding, the land, the people. So I feel like with the Black community, there is that spirit of let us really come together in that. So I just hope that somehow these conversations we continue to have with one another, it evolves that into some kind of meaningful gathering to start. What does this look like for the future of both communities, and how can this work support both communities being free?
So of course you ladies are leading this push in this plant medicine space. How will we be able to include more men of color or Black men to be able to lead in this space as well? And in my experience, has been proportionately more women in the Black mental health space than there are men. Like, how would you guys see how we can get more Black men in the space of doing the work and then also being able to lead the work?
Okay, so I have had a lot of experience with actually a lot of Black men coming to our ceremonies recently, so it's been mind-blowing to just see how they're able to break open in that way. But it all still stems down to that trust. Can I feel safe with you to cry? Can I feel safe with you to open up and appear what they may think is weaker? So with us, I feel like it takes a lot more strength to cry than it does to just be like stern. You know, so we've opened up that space because we've had so many women coming that people started asking, like their girlfriends and wives, and, you know, started coming to our ceremonies. And so now the men are coming, and then the men are like, hey, how can I help you? How can I be a part of it? What can we do? How can we be guardians of this space? And so it's just providing an opportunity to teach them by showing what we're doing. So when us as women truly step into our own power in those spaces, and we're holding space for these men in a way that's not judgmental and that's not so, you know, like judgy, like really, really judgy, where they can cry and we can hold them and rock them and rub their heads. These are the things that we're doing in ceremonies. And so then, but we're not making them feel disempowered in those moments. They're feeling like, oh, I have somebody where I can just, you know, break open with just for a little bit. I can just rest. I can put everybody down for just a second, and somebody just takes care of me for a moment. And then the next day during integration, they're like, yo, how can I help you guys? What can I do? I've never seen women in this way, standing in their power in this way. I've never had someone hold me like that. My girl never held me in that way. And it's from a motherly type of way. It's not intimate or sexual, but it's like, I have never felt that in a really long time. So it's just opening up a space where us as women invite the men to be able, like, we have to be the safe space for these men, for them to be able to go out and want to do these things. And so when they see that change in us, I feel like it empowers them to be more supportive as well as wanting to be a part of it.
Anybody else want to take that question?
So full transparency, I'm here to learn. I am here to learn. And one thing that I'm going to do is take the information that I've gathered here and pull them Black men in, pull white men in, and anybody, pull anybody in, because I'm a sharer of knowledge. So that's what I would do.
I agree.
I would say also just, I see someone with a camera taking pictures, and I think this right here is beautiful imagery that other Black men need to see. We have really strong Black and Indigenous women here, and you really supporting and facilitating a beautiful dialogue and conversation, and being able to see that wherever those pictures go, to say, wow, look at this, strong Black men on this, stage with all of these really strong women. I can do that too. If he can do that, I can do that. And I think, being able to see imagery and representation is so important for us, where we really don't see that, right?
And I think also it's the media. What are the images going out when you see Black men, right? It's like, this is so deep, right? We could have a whole panel about just that. But I do want to say that I think this movement, as you see more Black males in the influencer world, like Mike Tyson recently came out talking about more of his ayahuasca recent, episode. I mean, that's like Mike Tyson. That's somebody people relate to as somebody who is like, yeah, I need to heal. Look at him. Okay, he could do it. I could do it. So I think as this conversation expands more and mental health is normalized and getting help is normalized, seeking help, I think we're going to see a huge a surge, because I, like you as well as I lead ceremonies, I'm seeing this wave of Black men. I'm doing a documentary about that. Yeah.
I'm seeing that with, Lamar Odom, right? I had the privilege of, being the MC at Psychedelic Science with Jaden Smith. So we had Jaden Smith who came and really talked openly about his use of plant medicines and how that has supported him because his mother introduced him to that, right? So we're seeing more Black men become more open and vulnerable to be able to share, but it takes those folks to really stand up and also be held by community to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, so in my experience, since we've been in this space, I have seen, it was Aaron Rodgers at the Psychedelic Science Conference that made me decide to, hey, look, I can go speak about it versus just talk about it in private circles. So I do absolutely understand you guys as far as representation and someone actually having the courage to speak out on something that could be still has a stigma behind it, and that is helping us. If trying to think about how we can also access some of the resources that we see floating around and everyone is investing here and putting money there, how can we get for our communities some of the investments that are going out? And we've seen it was 12,000 people at MAPS. I don't know how many people are here, but there's a great deal of investment in this. How can we start getting people who are investing in these spaces to support our communities, the indigenous communities and the Black communities?
I would just like to say, we hear this word being thrown around a lot, the collective healing, right? We all want to support the collective healing to increase our consciousness. There is no collective healing without Black liberation and tribal sovereignty. There isn't. And so for us to be able to move the needle and for us to be able to come to this place of harmony, we need investment into our Black communities, into our Indigenous communities, into entire BIPOC communities, right? And I think largely we are excluded out of the conversation, and we look at the numbers and investment or philanthropic dollars, right? I think for Indigenous organizations, it's 0.4% of all philanthropic dollars come to our organizations. I think it's 1% for Black organizations. And so there's a real gap. And I think it really starts with having a lot of conversations, a lot of education, but also understanding that we are the subject matter experts of our community. We don't need you telling us what to do with the money or how to support our community. We need you to trust us and invest in us.
So I agree with her, but I also have a little bit different of a perspective. It's like sometimes, even though we don't have the funding, I think sometimes we also don't have the initiatives ready for the funding, and we're not in the right positions and in the right places to go get the money. And so, like, if the opportunity presented itself, so I came to this conference, right? There's people with all kinds of information at this conference. It's coming here to get education, to find out where the money is to get the funding, and then having the initiatives set aside, already ready to go. Here's what I want you to invest in. I had somebody ask me the first day I was here, what do you need? How can I help you? And I was like, I can tell you exactly what I need and how you can help me. I already had my initiatives planned out, like this is what I need funding for. I have a Breathe campaign. I want to make 85 scholarships for people of color to be able to come to my ceremonies. That's what I need right now. You know, so being able to have your initiatives ready to be like on your shit. Sorry to say it like that, but be on our shit, you know what I'm saying? Because yes, it is a struggle. So we have to be so on top of our game and know what we're talking about. So when that funding comes, it doesn't pass us by. We got to have it together, you know, like that's what I think. So I've been around here, I'm learning. Where is it at? How are you guys doing this? I want to know how you're doing it. And then I'm connecting and I'm partnering people, not just people of color, but people who believe in me in this environment that are like, how can I help you? So my goal being here is I'm looking for people who want to rock with me. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, well, let me partner with you, and then we can do something even with your organization for Black people. So that's how I'm kind of looking at it. It's like, yeah, we're left out and stuff, but I'm just looking at the way in to like partner with everybody else. It's like I can't think about like what we're lacking all the time. It's like I'm ready for you. I know where you can put the money at if you ask me. So I'm ready for that. So that's where I'm at this stage. Sorry, I got a little crunk.
I think also, though, something we have to consider, as someone who's just been a part of multiple different raises, you know, the money that we're accepting has to be proportional to the alignment of our values for our business, right? Because what I've seen a lot of times is that, oh, there are people ready to invest, right? But that investment comes with a lot of negotiations and a lot of, parts of yourself or your company you have to give up, right? And so I think, again, while we're having these conversations, and there's a lot of people who are eager because we, are coming with that pitch deck ready, we are coming with the numbers and the metrics, and we're ready to be able to, come into that relationship. Some of these relationships aren't that, they're transactional. So what is a relational investment looking like versus just transactional, right? And then how are we, and I think even with the foundation side, what I've really seen, and with my co-founder, Ariel Richer, who's out there in there, thank you. We've seen a lot of funding that's just not even worth it, right? Because, you're having all these grant requirements for a little bit of money, and you want more ownership and more reporting, right? And it's really that distrust that exists there. Or even what I've seen in, a biopharmaceutical company I advised, someone who claimed to be a social impact investor, right? Coming in and saying, well, we don't see the importance of having indigenous representation on your board and having the autonomy. So we need you to give that seat up so that we can come in and take more equity, right? So really having to screen folks and what their real intentions are when coming into, a community with you is so hard.
I agree. I'm not looking for those people. I'm just looking for the people that rock with me, who are in alignment with what I'm doing. I'm that leave room for miracles person to happen. Like, I'm not with the people who aren't in alignment with my vision. We can work together to make it better, but like, I'm not here to change who I am and change what I'm doing to go with like some other version. Those aren't my people, so those aren't my partners. So I'm like how you're saying, is building those relationships. I'm here building relationships and partnerships with people who rock with me, not who I'm trying to go be with. They see something in me. They're like, you know what? How can I help you? And mean it. Everybody is not out to get me. I stopped having to believe in that a long time ago, and I think as a culture, we do feel like everybody's out to get us sometime, because in the past, they always were. And now we're at a space where it's like, no, I know who I am. I know what I'm doing. And I'm in this space because I'm supposed to be in this space. People believe in me. My light, your light, our light, right? People believe in our vision. We were given these visions for a reason. People want to see that come to pass. It's not that they're always trying to take from us. And I think that we need to move out of that space. Some people really, really want to see us succeed. And so the rest of them, they could go over there. They're not my people,
Also, I just, thank you. Yes. I love listening to all of you so much. But just to also just expand a little bit more on what you were saying about all of this funding floating around. Like I was in Mexico a few months ago and I was facilitating the Psychedelic Funders Collaborative, billionaires that are funding all of this, the legalization, the propositions, all this stuff. Like it's a strategy. Right? So I think that was what was so interesting. Oh, this is a strategy, and there's conversations happening that we're not at the table of yet at all, happening with funding, with what's going on state levels where people are investing. But there is a lot, I think, that can be done in this space. For instance, I know Jay-Z was very interested in funding all these Black cannabis farmers. I think it's somehow we have to create these systems of collaboration. And how do we work together for the benefit of the community? What's transactional? What is the benefit just because it's the right thing to do? We're not trying to make money. Or when is it, this is like a big question with this whole area. It's so new in the BIPOC space. I think we need to be at those tables. That's all of them, our own kitchen table and then the bigger boardroom table to be thinking about what is impact, what is happening, and how can we influence this. We're just not at those seats right now.
But the question is, how do we get to the table, right? So it's getting in those environments to get to the table. It's building relationships. Each relationship that we make, even in these places, me meeting you and me meeting you, and it seems like we're building these relationships, we're gonna all get each other to another table, and to the next table, and to the next table. And so it's building genuine relationships. And when people really rock with you, you end up in rooms you didn't know you could be in. And so that's what I'm doing right now. It's like I'm building genuine relationships so people are like, I rock with that girl. You know what I'm saying? So I can get to whatever tables I'm supposed to be at. I'm not supposed to be at all the tables. Somebody else could be speaking for me. I don't have to be there sometimes.
I think even with, you mentioned PSFC, right? And they have priorities that they're focused on to fund. And so the last few years, there's been a lot of conversations with PSFC to really get them to understand the importance of supporting conservation within the psychedelic space. And there's a lot of education that's been required for those folks in that room and that table, but that conversation is happening. But, when we think about these, funder circles, it is important for us to be able to sit at the table and to be able to share the work that's happening because they are eager to learn. I think the gap is just education, understanding how it impacts the psychedelic ecosystem for them to understand. And I think, I've been an activist since I was 15 years old, so for 15 years. And my voice has always been able to translate to my community, to my people. I think many of you in this room get what I'm saying, what we're saying. We don't have to tailor our language. But what I've learned in the last 5 years in fundraising and coming into these circles is that I'm having to tailor my language for investors so that they can understand why this work that we're doing is so important. And I think, again, it's just that gap of education, but there are these really powerful spaces like PSFC and other collaborations and funds that have a lot of capital. I mean, this industry is a $6 billion industry, right? And so how are we getting to have a seat at that table and educating the people who have the capital to move?
So we have time for one question from the, sorry, but if anybody in the audience has a question.
Actually, you could take a couple if you need to. You can have a couple extra minutes if you need. Yeah.
All right, cool. So we got some time for question and answer. If anybody in the audience wants to ask these beautiful, brilliant women any questions about the intersection between race and mental health. Yeah? Let me see.
First of all, thank you so much for an incredible conversation. It's so great to see so many different perspectives when it comes to race and mental health. And you guys touched on it a little bit. Like, for example, the history towards Black people, medicine and healthcare is really difficult. A lot of people don't want to see their doctors. A lot of people don't want to see their psychiatrists. And I'm curious, what are things that you guys have found and been successful in actually educating BIPOC individuals that healthcare is so different today, and there are BIPOC leaders in this space as well that we should know about, but how are you translating that message that it's a new age and it's so beneficial, as we know, for so many different reasons, but there's that huge block in healthcare. And I guess that's very different from wellness. And you guys spoke a lot about wellness, but I'm just curious from that medical perspective, what are we missing and how can we get so much further in that area?
I think honestly, a lot of people can't afford healthcare. It's not that they just don't want it, it's that they can't afford it. Like, I remember when I was pregnant, and this is my husband, by the way. When I was pregnant, our healthcare per month was like almost $600. Like, new parents having to pay $600 a month through a whole entire pregnancy. Like, that's a lot of money to have to pay when you have a family, and you have kids, and you have all this stuff. And then when you get on the Medicaid, the type of treatment that you get is so whack that you don't want to go at all. You know, it's like the type of doctors that you get stuck with sometimes, the type of care that you get, the type of, you know what I'm saying, like that one-on-one, like feeling like somebody cares about you, not just, like herding the cattle type of feeling, like somebody that actually like is present with you. That's really hard to get on the free healthcare version. I paid for my doctor but I also had a doula and I also had a midwife, so I had both because I wanted to be safe and I wanted to, be able to do all the diagnostic stuff, but I also wanted to have a holistic home birth. I wanted to have a water birth, and even though when I went to my doctor and I said, hey, can you come and do a home birth at my house? He said, no, I can't do anything outside of the hospital. I would have loved to. And so I had to get two different types of people. So now I'm paying two people to have the experience that I want, And so that is it's not accessible. It's not that everybody doesn't want it. It's what type of care can I afford? And are you going to treat me well when I do it? And then sometimes, I'm sorry, I'm going long. Sometimes when we do have that type of care, we pay for it, then we are also still, childbirth rates for Black women, they're cutting us open. We don't need to be cut open. You know what I'm saying? They're doing things that you don't need to have happen in order for there to be more money spent. So it's like, yes, there's a distrust, but then there's also like you were saying, it's important, but we're moving more towards holistic medicine because they haven't taken care of us and we can't afford it. So I want to go to a tribe of people, a community of people that are going to take care of me instead of going somewhere where I'm not really wanted or needed. So that's what I've been through.
I'd also, go ahead. Yeah.
So right now, Precious Little Ladies just partnered with BetterHelp, the online therapy, to provide free therapy hours to women of color in underserved communities. So I think for me, as someone who is determined to provide resources to those who need it, I've kind of taken on this responsibility of making as much healthcare resources free as possible, so then you can afford it. But one thing that we have found is that then there's holding the people that receive the benefit accountable and then encouraging them to go. So it's kind of like a hand-holding experience. And I think on both sides, like you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So then that adds another layer in giving those who need it. Yes, you provide them the resources, but then you have to teach them how to use it. So it's a labor, it's ongoing, and you just need people that's willing to do it.
I would tell you how I do it. Is my mic on? Y'all can hear me? So I'll tell you how I do it. I hide mental health in the youth, sports-based youth development programs. So we teach coaches and parents trauma-informed techniques and brain-based coaching so they can hold space. Because I think if everybody who needed a therapist or a holistic doctor or something like that, if everyone had it, we don't have enough. If everyone who needed it actually sought out the people, we don't have enough people, enough facilitators to manage everyone's mental health. So we need to make some of the caretakers that are in the same spaces that these children are, in the same spaces that these adults are, who have a better understanding, who can be mental health advocates. I know of a company that, an organization that coaches hairstylists on being a mental health advocate for the people that they do hair for. So there's many ways that we can start utilizing people who are already in the spaces that we occupy that can become more aware of how they can be more therapeutic and create more therapeutic environments for people of color or anyone to have access to things that they probably wouldn't have access in the past. And so then we can then start directing funding into those educational opportunities and training opportunities for people who are already seen as leaders in these communities.
Great.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add very quick. Okay, so really quick, I just wanted to add to your question. I think community-based participatory research is number one. And two, those who are delivering the services matter, right? When we looked at our community-based needs assessment, our community, our urban native community, wants to receive services from people who have their life experiences. So that is why we are creating the center to bring indigenous therapists, to bring case managers who are indigenous, because we don't want to explain, 500 years of historical and intergenerational trauma, right? We want to get to doing the work. So I think that's really important, and really making sure that every step of your way, you're bringing community co-creation and consent and consultation a part of whatever it is you're trying to scale.
So thank you guys so much. They have given us a little bit extra time, and we have been able to do it. And so thank you so much for Spring, Phoenix, Sutton, and Azusa. And thank you guys for having us.
Wonderful.
Thank you.